At 2:14 in the morning, my phone rang, and the moment I answered, I heard my granddaughter crying. "Grandpa, please come get me. I am at the police station." I sat up in bed. "Emily, what happened?" She took a shaky breath and said, "My stepmother hurt me." Then told the police that I attacked her. They believe her, not me. I was already reaching for my jacket. "Stay there. I am coming." I drove through the empty streets with my hands tight around the steering wheel. Emily had always been a quiet girl. She never called me late at night, and she never asked for help unless she truly needed it. That was why her voice scared me more than her words. When I reached the station, I saw my son Daniel standing near the front desk. Rachel, his wife, was beside him with a small bandage on her forehead. Daniel looked at me and said, "Dad, please do not make this worse." I stared at him. "Your daughter is sitting in a police station at 2 in the morning. How could I make this worse?" Rachel started crying. She said Emily had attacked her after they argued. I looked at her, then through the glass at Emily. My granddaughter was sitting alone, holding a cold pack against her cheek. When she saw me, she stood up. I moved toward her, but an officer stopped me. "Sir, you are her grandfather?" I nodded. He lowered his voice. "There are some things you need to know before you talk to her." I asked what he meant. He said Rachel's story had several problems, but they could not ignore the injuries either. Then he told me something that made my stomach tighten. "We found something inside the house that your granddaughter says proves she was telling the truth." I asked what it was. He did not answer. Instead, he looked toward Daniel and Rachel and said, "We are still checking it." Finally, I was allowed into the room with Emily. I sat beside her and held her hand. "Emily, look at me. Tell me what happened." She wiped her tears and whispered, "Grandpa, I did not attack Rachel." I told her I believed her. She squeezed my hand and leaned closer. "Then you need to know something before Dad gets you alone." I asked what. She looked through the glass at her father and whispered, "Grandpa, Dad is not telling you the real reason they called the police." I looked at Emily and asked, "What is your dad not telling me?" She glanced at the glass door and lowered her voice. "He knows why Rachel attacked me." I felt my stomach tighten. "Why?" Emily shook her head. "Because of something I found in his office." Before I could ask more, an officer entered and told me they needed to take Emily's statement. I stepped outside and found Daniel waiting for me. "Dad, you need to stay out of this," he said. I stared at him. "She is your daughter." He rubbed his face. "I know, but you do not understand what has been happening at home." I asked him what he meant, but he kept avoiding my eyes. Finally, he said Emily had become obsessed with Rachel and had been looking through private things that did not belong to her. "What did she find?" I asked. Daniel went quiet. That silence told me there was something more. I asked again, and he finally said, "Old financial records." I felt a chill. "Whose records?" He looked at me. "Yours." I could not believe what I was hearing. Why would Emily be looking at my financial records? Daniel said she had found them in his office and started asking questions about money that had disappeared years ago. I asked him what money he was talking about. He immediately changed the subject and told me Rachel had been under a lot of stress. I knew he was avoiding the question. When he walked away, I went back to Emily. She told me that a few weeks earlier, she had found an old folder hidden behind a cabinet in Daniel's office. Inside were copies of bank statements and a document with my signature. The document showed that money had been moved from an account I shared with my late wife into another account. I asked Emily if she knew where the money went. She shook her head. "That is what I was trying to find." Out. Then she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and gave it to me. It was a copy of a bank transfer. I recognized the account number immediately. It belonged to me. But the date made no sense. The transfer had happened 8 years ago, before Rachel had even met Daniel. I looked at Emily. Why would Rachel care about something that happened before she entered this family? Emily stared at me and whispered, "Because Grandpa, Rachel did not start this." I felt a cold silence settle over me. Then who did? Emily looked toward the hallway where her father had disappeared. "I think Dad knows." I could not stop thinking about Emily's last words. I think Dad knows. I'd spent my whole life believing Daniel would never hide something serious from me. Now, for the first time, I wondered if I had been wrong. I asked Emily why she believed her father knew about the money. She told me that she had found another document in his office. It was a letter from a bank manager dated 8 years earlier. The letter said someone had tried to close the account after a large transfer, but the request was stopped because the signature did not match the records. Emily had taken a photo of the letter before Rachel found her in the office. That is when she started asking me what I had seen, Emily said. She told me to forget about it. I asked if Daniel knew she had the letter. Emily shook her head. I do not think so. I left the station for a few minutes and called my old bank. I asked them about the account and gave them the number from the paper. The manager put me on hold for several minutes. When he returned, his voice sounded careful. Sir, that account was not closed. I felt my chest tighten. What do you mean? He said the account had been moved into a different branch and was still active. Then he told me something that made my hands go cold. There is another authorized person listed on it. I asked for the name. He said, Daniel Carter, my own son. I ended the call and stood outside the station, staring at the empty road. Daniel had access to the account years before Rachel came into our family. I went back inside and found him near the waiting area. Why are you listed on my old account? I asked. His face changed instantly. Dad, I can explain. Then explain. He looked around and lowered his voice. Mom asked me to help with it. I stared at him. Your mother was dead by the time most of these transfers happened. He had no answer. Then Rachel walked toward us and said, Daniel, do not tell him anything here. I turned toward her. Anything about what? She stopped. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel quietly said, Dad, there is something about Mom that you never knew. My heart began pounding. What? He looked at Rachel, then back at me. The account was not opened for you. I felt confused. Then why was my name on it? Daniel swallowed hard. Because Mom used it to hide money from someone. Before I could ask who, an officer rushed over and said Emily had remembered something important about the night of the attack. Then he added, Sir, you need to hear this. Your granddaughter says the person who attacked her was not Rachel. The officer's words stopped me cold. The person who attacked Emily was not Rachel. I looked at Emily, through the glass, then at Daniel and Rachel. For the first time, Rachel's face did not look angry or scared. She looked relieved. I asked the officer what Emily had told him. He said she remembered someone entering the house after Rachel left the room. The person wore a dark jacket and kept their face covered. Emily had only seen them for a few seconds, but she remembered one detail. A ring, the officer said. Emily noticed a large silver ring on the person's right hand. I immediately thought of Daniel. He often wore an old silver ring that had belonged to his grandfather. But when I looked at his hand, the ring was gone. Where is your ring? I asked him. Daniel froze. I lost it. I stared at him. When? He could not give me a clear answer. Rachel quickly stepped in and said, Daniel has been under a lot of stress. Stop questioning him like he is a criminal. I turned toward her. Then why is he hiding things from me? She said nothing. The officer told me Emily had also mentioned hearing the attacker say something. At first, she could not remember the words. Then, while sitting with the officer, she suddenly remembered. He said, Your grandfather should have left the past alone. My blood ran cold. The attacker knew about me. This was not just a fight inside my son's house. Someone had come there because of the old account and the money. I asked the officer if there were cameras outside the house. He said there was a camera across the street, but the recording had not yet been checked. I asked him to check it immediately. While we waited, I pulled Daniel aside. Tell me the truth. Did you know someone was looking into that old account? He looked down. Yes. Who? I asked. He finally said, a man named Thomas Reed. My heart stopped. Thomas was my late wife's former business partner. I had not heard his name in years. Thomas is dead, I said. Daniel nodded. That is what everyone thinks. Before I could ask another question, the officer came running toward us with a tablet in his hand. He had checked the street camera. The footage showed a dark car parked outside the house shortly before. Emily was attacked. The officer zoomed in on the driver. I stared at the screen. I knew that face. I had seen it years ago in one of my wife's old photographs. Then the officer said, Sir, the man in that car is not Thomas Reed, it is his son. I stared at the screen. trying to understand what I was seeing. Thomas Reed was dead, but his son was sitting in a car outside my son's house. The officer told me his name was Michael Reed. I had never met him, but my late wife had mentioned him once. She had said he was the kind of person who always wanted to know things that were not his business. I asked the officer if Michael had been inside the house. He said they were still checking the footage, but the car had arrived 20 minutes before. Emily was attacked and left shortly after. I looked at Daniel. You knew about him, did you not? Daniel shook his head. I knew his name, but I have not spoken to him in years. I did not believe him completely, but I did not accuse him either. I had learned one thing that night. I needed proof before I trusted anyone. I asked the officer if I could see the full bank records. He told me I would need to request them through my bank. I called the manager again and asked for every transaction connected to the old account. While I waited, Emily came out of the interview room. She looked tired, but she was calmer now. She told me she had something else in her bag. It was an old notebook she had found in Daniel's office. The first few pages were blank, but near the middle I found dates, amounts, and short notes written in my son's handwriting. Most of the payments matched the transfers from my old account. I felt a deep sadness more than anger. I asked Emily why she had kept the notebook instead of showing it to her father. She said, because I was afraid he was part of it. I told her she had done the right thing by keeping herself safe. Then I noticed one name repeated beside several payments. Michael Reed. I asked Daniel about it. His face went pale. Dad, I can explain. I held up the notebook. Then explain this. He looked at the pages and finally admitted that he had met Michael several times, but he insisted he never stole my money. He said Michael had been helping him find out what happened to the money my wife had hidden before she died. I asked why he never told me. Daniel looked at the floor. Because Mom made me promise. I felt my heart sink. Why would your mother make you promise something like that? He did not answer. Then my bank manager called. I put the phone on speaker. His voice was serious. Sir, we found the original transfer documents. I asked who had signed them. He paused before answering. Your wife. I looked at Daniel. He was crying now. Dad, he whispered, there is something about Mom you were never supposed to know. Then the bank manager added, but there is a second signature on the same document. The bank manager's words left me staring at the phone. A second signature? I asked. Whose? He told me he could not give me the name over the phone, but he could send the document to my email. I thanked him and ended the call. Daniel was still standing in front of me with tears in his eyes. Dad, please let me explain before you decide what kind of person I am. I looked at him, then stop hiding things from me. He took a breath. Mom asked me to sign that document. I felt confused. Why would she ask you to sign a paper moving money from an account in my name? Daniel said the money was never meant to be mine. My wife had been keeping it aside for someone. For who? I asked. He looked toward Emily. For her. I turned toward my granddaughter. Emily looked just as shocked as I was. Daniel explained that years ago, my wife had discovered that someone was secretly taking money from a family business. She did not know who was behind it, so she moved part of the money into a separate account and put my name on it to keep it safe. She made Daniel a second signer because she trusted him to protect it if something happened to her. I asked why he had never told me. Because Mom made me promise not to, he said. She said the wrong person would come, looking for it. I asked who that person was. Daniel shook his head. I never knew. Then my phone received the email from the bank. I opened the document and saw my wife's signature. Beneath it was Daniel's, but there was another page attached. It showed that the money had been transferred years later to a company called Reed Holdings. I looked at Daniel. You said you never knew who took the money. He nodded. I did not. I pointed to the document. Then why does this company have Michael Reed's name on it? Daniel looked stunned. I have never seen that page. Emily suddenly stepped closer. Grandpa, look at the date. I checked it. The transfer happened only 2 weeks after my wife died. That meant someone had access to the account after her death and knew exactly where the money was. Then the officer walked over and told us something even more disturbing. They had checked the street camera again and found another vehicle near Daniel's house that night. It belonged to Michael Reed, but Michael was not alone. Someone had been sitting in the passenger seat. The officer showed me a still image. I recognized the person immediately. My heart dropped. It was Rachel. I stared at the photograph of Rachel sitting in Michael Reed's car, and suddenly the whole night looked different. Rachel had told the police she had been inside the house when Emily attacked her. But the camera showed her with Michael shortly before Emily was hurt. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something. He looked completely broken. "Dad, I did not know about this," he said. I believed that part of him. Daniel had spent years trusting Rachel, just as I had trusted him. The officer asked Rachel to explain why she had been with Michael. She became defensive. I was meeting him because he had information. "About the old account," she said. I asked, "Then why did you tell the police you had never spoken to him?" She had no answer. She finally said she was afraid. Michael had been threatening her because she knew too much. I asked what she knew. She looked at Daniel and then at me. "Your wife left something behind," she said. "Something Michael has been trying to find for years." I asked what it was, but Rachel refused to answer. The officer told her she could either explain or wait for her lawyer. She chose the lawyer. That should have made me more suspicious. But part of me still wanted to believe there was a simple explanation. I wanted to believe Rachel had been scared and that Emily had simply been caught in the middle. Daniel seemed to want the same thing. He stood beside Rachel and said, "Dad, maybe we should stop before this destroys the family." I looked at him and said, "The family was already being destroyed. I am just trying to find out who did it." Later that night, Rachel was released while the investigation continued. Daniel took her home. I watched them leave together. For the first time, I felt that Rachel believed she had won. She thought I had no idea what she was hiding. She thought Daniel would keep protecting her. And she thought the police did not have enough proof. She was wrong. Before I left, the officer quietly handed me a copy of the camera footage and said, "Do not show this to anyone." Yet. I thanked him and drove. Home with Emily. Once we were inside, Emily looked at me and said, "Grandpa, there is one thing I have not told you." I asked what it was. She opened her bag and pulled out a small envelope. I found this in Grandma's old room. On the front, in my wife's handwriting, were 6 words. "Give this to Grandpa when Rachel is exposed." I held the envelope in my hands for several seconds before opening it. My wife's handwriting was clear, even after all those years. Inside was a single photograph and a short note. The photograph showed my wife standing beside a young Daniel outside an old office building. On the back, she had written a date. I looked at it and realized it was only days before the first suspicious money transfer. The note said, "David, if Rachel ever becomes part of this, do not accuse Daniel too quickly. He is protecting someone because he believes he is protecting our family." I read it twice. Then I looked at Emily. "Your grandmother knew this could happen?" Emily nodded. "I think she did." I wanted to know who Daniel had been protecting. So I called him. He answered almost immediately. "Dad, is Emily with you?" I said yes. There was silence. Then I asked him directly, "Who is Rachel protecting?" Daniel did not answer. I heard his breathing on the phone. Finally, he said, "Dad, I need you to trust me." I almost laughed. "That is exactly what I have been doing for years." He went quiet again. Then he said, "Meet me tomorrow morning." "Come alone." I asked where. He gave me the address of an old cafe near the river. I agreed, but I did not tell him I would not be alone. The next morning, Emily and I met with the officer who had been helping us. I showed him the photograph, the note, and the camera footage. He told me the evidence was becoming stronger, but we still needed to understand what Daniel knew. I decided to meet my son and let him think I had come alone. At the cafe, Daniel was already sitting in the corner. He looked tired and nervous. "Dad," he said, "Rachel did not start this." I sat down across from him. "Then who did?" He looked toward the window before answering. "My mother." I felt as if the room had suddenly gone silent. "Your mother?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "Mom was hiding money from someone, but she was also hiding something from you." I asked what. He reached into his jacket and placed an old key on the table. "She told me never to give this to you unless Rachel was exposed." I picked it up. There was a number engraved on it. 14. I asked what it opened. Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. A storage room your wife rented under another name. Then he whispered, "And Dad, Michael Reed already knows about it." I kept staring at the key marked 214. A part of me wanted to ask Daniel 100 questions, but another part told me to stay quiet and listen. "How does Michael know about the storage room?" I asked. Daniel looked down. "Because I told him." My heart sank. "You told him?" Daniel nodded. I did not know what it was when I first told him. Rachel had been asking me about an old place Mom used to keep things. I thought she was trying to help me understand the money. I asked him why he never told me. He said he was afraid that if I found out, I would confront Rachel before he understood the whole story. I looked at my son and said, "You were protecting the wrong person." He nodded. "I know that now." Then Daniel told me something I had never expected. Rachel had not met Michael by chance. She had been working with him before she even married Daniel. They had been trying to find whatever my wife had hidden in storage room 214. I asked why. Daniel said Michael believed my wife had kept proof there that could destroy his father's old business, but Thomas Reed was dead. Then why does Michael still care? I asked. Daniel looked at me. Because whatever Mom found could prove that Thomas did not act alone. That sentence stayed with me. I realized the old money transfers were only part of the story. My wife had been investigating something much bigger. I decided to visit the storage room, but I did not tell Daniel when. Before leaving the cafe, I gave him one chance to prove he was finally on my side. "If you want to help me, do not tell Rachel where I am going." Daniel promised he would not. I left with Emily and contacted the officer. He agreed to meet us nearby. We reached the old building just before sunset. The hallway was quiet. I found room 214 and put the key into the lock. It opened. Inside, there were no boxes or furniture. The room looked completely empty. Emily walked toward the back wall and suddenly stopped. "Grandpa, look!" There was a loose wooden panel near the floor. I pulled it away and found a small metal box hidden behind it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were old bank records, photographs, and a small voice recorder. I pressed the button. My wife's voice filled the empty room. "David, if you are hearing this, then someone has already found the money." I looked at Emily. Then, my wife said something that made my blood run cold. "But the person you should fear is not Michael Reed." The recording continued for only a few seconds before her voice became faint. Then she said, "David, the person helping him is someone you would never suspect." I replayed my wife's recording twice, but the last words kept echoing in my head. "The person helping him is someone you would never suspect." I looked at Emily. She was staring at the metal box, waiting for me to say something. I asked the officer to keep the box untouched until we could document everything inside. As we went through the papers, I noticed something strange. Several of the bank records had been copied recently. Someone had opened the box before us. Then I found a photograph of my wife with 3 people standing behind her. One was Thomas Reed. The second was his son, Michael. The third person was partly hidden by the edge of the picture. I turned it over and found a date from 9 years earlier. Emily suddenly pointed at the hidden person. "Grandpa, I know that jacket." I looked closer. It was a dark blue jacket with a small silver button on the sleeve. Emily said she had seen the same jacket the night she was attacked. My stomach tightened. The attacker was connected to my wife's past. Then I found a receipt inside the box. It was from a private investigator my wife had hired shortly before she died. The receipt listed one name as the person she had been investigating: Daniel. I felt like the floor had moved beneath me. I looked at my son's name again and tried to understand why my wife would investigate him. Daniel had been her trusted son. He had helped her with the family business. Why would she suspect him? I called Daniel and asked him to meet me at the storage building. When he arrived, I showed him the receipt. His face went pale. "Dad, I can explain." I asked him to tell me everything. He finally admitted that my wife had discovered he was meeting Michael Reed years earlier. But Daniel insisted he had never stolen from me. He had been trying to find out who was using his name to move the money. I asked why he had lied to me. He said he was ashamed and afraid I would never forgive him. Then he looked at Emily and said, "There is something I never told either of you." He pulled out his phone and showed us an old message from my wife. It said, "Daniel, if anything happens to me, do not trust the person who says they are helping you." I asked him who had been helping him. Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. It was Rachel. I felt my chest tighten. But then Daniel shook his head. "Dad, that is not the worst part." He showed me another message. It had been sent from Rachel's phone to Michael Reed 9 years ago. The message said only 6 words. "He still does not know the truth." I stared at the message on Daniel's phone. He still does not know the truth. I asked him what it meant, but he could not answer right away. He looked ashamed. "Dad, I thought Rachel was helping me find out what Mom had hidden. I did not know she was working with Michael." I told him that was not enough. "You knew she was contacting him. You knew money was moving. And you still said nothing." Daniel lowered his head. I was scared. I wanted to be angry, but I could see how badly he had been controlled. Still, fear did not erase what he had done. Then Emily stepped closer and said, "Grandpa, there is something else." She opened the small metal box again and pulled out a folded photograph. It showed Rachel standing beside Michael outside the same building where we were standing. The date was 9 years earlier. I looked at Daniel. "You said Rachel met Michael later." He shook his head. I was wrong. Suddenly, we heard a car stop outside. The officer moved toward the door and told us to stay quiet. Through the small window, I saw Rachel step out of the car. Michael was with her. They had found us. Rachel entered the building and called my name. "David, I know you are here." I did not answer. She continued, "You have no idea what you are getting into. Give me the box, and this can all end tonight." I looked at Emily. She was frightened, but she stayed beside me. The officer quietly signaled that he was ready. I stepped into the hallway holding the metal box. Rachel looked at me and said, "You should have trusted your family." I replied, "I did. That was my mistake." Michael moved closer, but the officer stepped out and ordered him to stop. Michael froze. Rachel tried to run, but another officer caught her near the entrance. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then Michael laughed. He looked directly at me and said, "You still do not know what your wife did." I asked him what he meant. He smiled and said, "She did not hide that money to protect you." He pointed toward Daniel. "She hid it because she knew. Your son was the one who betrayed her." First, I looked at Daniel. His face went completely white. And then for the first time he said the words I had been afraid to hear. "Dad, he is telling the truth." I looked at Daniel and felt something inside me break. After everything I had heard, I still wanted him to say Michael was lying. Instead, Daniel lowered his head and said, "Dad, I did betray Mom, but I did not know what Rachel was planning." I asked him what he had done. He told me that years ago, he had secretly copied some of my mother's business records and given them to Michael. Daniel believed Michael was only trying to recover money that Thomas Reed had stolen. He did not know that Michael wanted the records for another reason. "Mom found out," Daniel said. "She moved the money and hid the evidence. She told me never to tell you because she thought you would blame me." Felt angry and hurt. "You let me believe everything was fine for years." Daniel nodded. "I know." Rachel suddenly started shouting from the hallway. She told Daniel that if he spoke again, she would tell the police he had helped her attack Emily. That was when Daniel finally understood that Rachel had been using the same fear against him that she had used against Emily. He turned toward the officers and said, "I will tell you everything." Rachel went silent. Daniel explained how Rachel had approached him years earlier, pretending to help him find the money. She slowly gained his trust and convinced him that my wife had hidden something from all of us. Later, she introduced him to Michael. Daniel gave them information without realizing what they intended to do with it. But after Emily discovered the transfers, Rachel panicked. She attacked Emily, then tried to make it look like Emily had attacked her. The officers collected the recording, bank documents, photographs, and the messages from Rachel's phone. Michael also faced charges connected to the financial scheme. Rachel's story collapsed piece by piece. But I still had one question. "Why did my wife hide the money from me?" Daniel looked at the metal box. "Because she knew you would try to protect me." I stared at him. That answer hurt more than anything else. My wife had known her son was involved, yet she had still tried to protect him. She had been afraid that if I knew the truth, I would destroy my relationship with Daniel. Instead, her silence had allowed the lies to grow. I walked outside and took a deep breath. Emily came beside me and held my hand. "Grandpa, I am sorry." I shook my head. "None of this was your fault." Then, the officer came outside with one final document. It was a letter from my wife. He handed it to me and said, "She left this for you." I opened it with trembling hands. The first line said, "David, if you are reading this, then our family has finally reached the truth." I opened my wife's letter with shaking hands. The first line said, "David, if you are reading this, then our family has finally reached the truth." I kept reading. She explained that she had known Daniel made a terrible mistake years ago, but she also knew he had been young, confused, and easily influenced. She did not want to destroy her son, so she gave him one chance to fix what he had done. She moved the money into the hidden account and kept the evidence where nobody could find it. But she had never expected Rachel and Michael to become involved. My wife wrote that Michael had spent years searching for the missing records because his father had left behind a secret that could expose several people. She also wrote that Rachel had approached Daniel long before she married him. She had pretended to care about him, but she was really looking for the money. That was why she had pushed Emily into silence when she discovered the truth. I finished the letter and looked at Daniel. "Your mother knew," I said. He nodded with tears in his eyes. She knew everything. I felt a deep sadness. My wife had carried this secret alone because she thought she was protecting us. But now I understood that her biggest mistake was believing she had to protect everyone from the truth. The police took Rachel and Michael away, and Daniel gave them every record he had. Emily was cleared of all charges, and the evidence against Rachel became impossible to ignore. The bank returned the money that could be traced, and the rest of the missing funds became part of the investigation. But I still had one thing left to do. I asked Daniel to sit with me. "You hurt your mother. You lied to me. And you allowed Emily to suffer because you were afraid." Daniel looked down. "I know." I told him that I could not erase what he had done, but I also would not let one terrible mistake decide the rest of his life. "If you want my trust again," I said, "you have to earn it slowly." He nodded. Then Emily walked into the room. Daniel stood up and looked at his daughter. "Emily, I am sorry." She did not hug him. She simply said, "Then prove it." Daniel nodded. For the first time, I saw him understand that an apology was only the beginning. Later that evening, I stood alone outside my house and looked at the old family photograph hanging near the door. For years, I thought it showed a happy family. Now I knew there had been secrets behind those smiles. But I also knew something else. Secrets had almost destroyed us, while the truth had finally given us a chance to rebuild. I folded my wife's letter and placed it safely in my pocket. Then my phone rang. It was the officer. His voice sounded serious. "Sir, we found one more name in your wife's records." I asked who. He paused before saying, "It is someone you have known for more than 20 years. The officer's words stayed in my head. "Someone you have known for more than 20 years. When he gave me the name, my heart sank. It was Mr. Collins, my old financial advisor. I had trusted him for more than 20 years. He had helped my wife with our accounts and even advised Daniel after she died. Now I learned that his name appeared beside several suspicious transfers. Suddenly I understood why my wife had hidden the truth. She was not hiding the money from me. She was trying to protect me from someone I trusted completely. Mr. Collins had helped move the money years ago and later used Daniel, Rachel, and Michael to keep the truth hidden. But now the evidence was finally complete. Mr. Collins was arrested, and the missing money was traced. Emily was cleared of every charge. Rachel and Michael also faced the consequences of their actions. Daniel changed after that night. He stopped making excuses and started being there for Emily. He knew he could not erase what he had done, so he focused on proving that he could become a better father. Emily slowly began trusting him again, but this time trust had to be earned. I changed too. I stopped believing that keeping peace meant staying silent. I stopped trusting people simply because I had known them for years. Most importantly, I stopped blaming myself for loving my family. My wife had spent years trying to protect us, but I finally understood that real protection is not hiding the truth. It is having the courage to face it. Months later, I visited my wife's grave with Emily beside me. I placed her letter near the flowers and whispered, You were right. The truth finally came out. Emily held my arm and said, "Grandpa, I'm glad you believed me." I looked at her and replied, "I should have believed you before you ever had to ask." That sentence stayed with me. The night Emily called me from the police station, I thought I was simply going to protect my granddaughter from a false accusation. I never imagined I would uncover years of lies involving my son, Rachel, Michael, and the man I had trusted for 2 decades. But I learned something I will never forget. Family is not only about blood, it is about the people who tell you the truth, stand beside you, and believe you when everyone else turns away. Emily called me because she needed someone to believe her. I answered the phone, and I will always be grateful that I did.